I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. And as always, I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala. And today, Elizabeth, we have updates on two local cases that we've discussed before. Let's start first with Mark Benavides.
Yes. Hi, Chance. It's great to be back with you. On Friday, late Friday, the attorney for Mark Benavides, of course, he is now a convicted trafficker and a former San Antonio lawyer. His attorney withdrew from the remaining four cases against him and was immediately appointed to continue representing him going forward. Now, what happened here is that Benavides, who's 48 years old, has, of course, he was just convicted of continuous trafficking of persons. This happened in April. And a Wilson County jury sentenced him to 80 years in prison on 6 counts of continuous trafficking of persons. And this was for forcing clients into having sex in exchange for keeping them out of jail. And he has filed an appeal on his conviction. And that's kind of where this particular thing gets started. In talking to his attorney, Monica E. Guerrero, who appeared in court with Judge Dick Alcala at a hearing late Friday, Monica wanted for Mark to be represented by an appellate lawyer because his appeal is just getting started since he was just convicted. So a couple of things happened on Friday. Monica Guerrero and her co-counsel, Lisa Rodriguez, withdrew not just for the appellate reason, but also because Monica Guerrero told the judge that the Benavides family basically is out of money. Before he went to trial in late March and early April, his family had already paid, I believe the figure was $625,000, keeping him out of jail during this time that he was going through these particular cases. He was just convicted on the continuous trafficking, and now he has 4 cases that are pending against him. They are 2 sexual assault of a child cases, 1 sexual assault case, and another continuous trafficking of persons that is pending. So what I thought was real interesting is that one of the prosecutors, Jay Norton, on Friday afternoon asked the judge during the hearing if Monica Guerrero could continue on representing Mark Benavides through the rest of the cases, because he told the court that it would put them in somewhat of, basically they would have to, do a lot of things over again if they had somebody else coming in, to take over on those cases. Norton told Judge Alcala that it would greatly set them back. So he asked that Alcala appoint Monica Guerrero to the remaining cases, which he did during court. So just updating that a little bit, we're going to be likely going to trial again, and based upon what prosecutors Jay Norton and Meredith Chacon said in court Friday, they're really ready to go on any of these 4 cases at any time. So Judge Alcala has set July 5th for another hearing, and at that time he's going to decide whether, whether or not another thing that came up is that they're wanting to bring the cases back to Bexar County. As we talked about last time, the cases were heard, this case that Mark Benavides was convicted on was heard in Wilson County on a change of venue because some of the victims in Mark Benavides' case testified that they actually had sex with their attorney, Mark Benavides, in some of the jury rooms and counsel areas of some of the courtrooms in the Cadena Reeves Justice Center, which is where all of the criminal trials occur in Bexar County. So that's part of the reason why they had the change of venue to Wilson County. Of the 4 remaining cases, the newest one, the new continuous trafficking of persons, which came probably about a month or 2 before the actual trial started for Mark Benavides, that case has not been moved to Wilson County, but it seems like it's based upon some of the chatter I heard in the hearing on Friday that they may actually move that one as well because Jay Norton was saying that this could possibly have the same sort of situation as the other cases where some of the rooms that, potential jurors who would be serving on cases, they would be doing their own investigation, being that all of these rooms basically look the same. So that was the initial reason they wanted to change a venue. So in July, we'll be able to see what exactly is going to happen moving forward with Mark Benavides' chance.
And Elizabeth, I have one specific question about this. So the lawyer for Mark Benavides is now, if you will, resigned, but then reappointed by the court. Does that mean the court is now paying the same price that this lawyer was being paid by the defendant, but now it's being paid by the state?
Well, actually, that is an interesting question. I don't exactly know how much defense attorneys charge, private defense attorneys. I'm just gonna guess and say that whatever price Monica Guerrero was charging Mark Benavides when she was hired as his attorney, and also Lisa Rodriguez as well, whatever they were being paid by the family is going to be much different than what they're going to be getting from the state, because those fees are basically set up by the state themselves and probably the counties that run the courts, but it's all it's a state situation. So, the state is going to pay for Mark Benavides' attorneys going forward, but it's not going to be the same price that private defense attorneys, can ask and get. It's just that with this particular case, a couple of hearings ago, Monica Guerrero had asked Judge Alcala to come down on the bail that Mark was being held on because they were basically running out of money really fast. And right before this trial started, she had told the judge that the family was already out $625,000. That's a lot of money. Certainly, for me, I don't know. He was an attorney for quite a while, but after a while, these start to mount. And today, as of Friday, the family no longer has the resources to hire an attorney for him. So because she is on what they call in Bexar County the wheel, Monica Guerrero also, she is a private defense attorney, but she also can be appointed to cases. So I thought it was interesting that the prosecutors, had asked the judge to allow her to remain but this time she'll be going in as a court-appointed attorney.
It's such an ironic situation because Mark Benavides, all these crimes, some of that he's already been convicted of, took place while he was a court-appointed attorney himself. Yes,
it is ironic. It's so many things, Chance. I think he in Friday afternoon in court, he seemed jovial. In fact, I noticed a situation where one of the bailiffs passed by and said, "Mark, how you doing?" He has history in Bexar County, for a long time before, being in several different courts, representing several different, clients, misdemeanor and also for some felony cases. So, this has got to be a really, I don't even know how to define it. It's got to be a very strange situation for everybody involved. He worked with a lot of people in the courthouse, a lot of bailiffs who now are, moving him from a courtroom to a jail cell while he awaits his next trial date. And basically what we're hearing now also is that all 4 of these remaining cases against him are going to go to trial. There doesn't seem to be any talk or movement toward any plea deals. So we may be talking about this case again.
Perhaps. Yeah, we'll have to see how things work out. That's quite a few trials to have on the docket coming up here in the future.
Exactly. And again, he's already been sentenced to 80 years in prison on the 6 counts of continuous trafficking of persons. So, and they all will be served at the same time. But at this point, Mark Benavides is going to be well into his 70s before he is eligible for parole.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney. Let's continue now, Elizabeth, with our second case update for today. It's another local case. There was a verdict in the murder trial for a man who was accused of murdering his own brother. Tell me about that.
Yes, just to recap on this one, Chance, Gregorio Barrera was 48 years old and already in jail on a criminal trespassing charge when he was implicated and charged with killing his brother, Andres Barrera, 46. Andres's remains were found September 25th, 2016, buried in 3 feet of sand on Padre Island National Seashore in Kleberg County. That's near Corpus Christi. During the trial, which lasted 2 weeks, we heard from Kleberg County Sheriff's Office investigators and the Nueces County medical examiner that Andy, which is what the family called him, had been in the sand dunes for several weeks before he was discovered. And meanwhile, and this all happened around Labor Day weekend in 2016, when relatives I called police and reported that their brother Andy was missing. And what this all seems to be about was that Andy and Greg, as relatives, referred to the brothers during the trial, were fighting over the home that their parents had. This is a home in the 8700 block of Sagebrush, which is on the northeast side of San Antonio. And these men apparently they would fight, like physically fight each other. And before Andy went missing, they argued over the house regarding a loan that had been taken out on the property that had not been paid. And Andy apparently had Greg evicted from the house. Now, the family was working on this house. They were doing renovations to it, and Andy was paying mortgage on the house. So they were redoing it, and somehow Greg went to live at the house, and Andy lived in an apartment. So at some point, when Greg got evicted, this came out in testimony last week, that Greg told Andy that he would drop assault charges against him if he rescinded the eviction. And that was kind of like one of the last things that we heard in closing arguments before the jury went out. And it took the jury a little under 4.5 hours to render a guilty verdict against Gregorio Barrera. And what was interesting about this is that you don't really have a witness that puts Greg, physically puts him, in a place where somebody can actually say, hey, I saw him do this. But what prosecutors brought to the table for the jury was lots of video that was taken from Bexar County investigators of when the remains were found. Investigators in Bexar County also had a lot of video that they showed of the 8700 block of sagebrush, where even though they were doing renovations inside the house, as jurors watched this, as the jury watched it, as those of us sitting in the gallery watched it, the investigator going through showed there was blood spatter all over this house. There was blood on the walls. There was blood on the ceiling fan. There was blood on the blades of the ceiling fan. One person might think that maybe the ceiling fan was on when something terrible happened there, and just blood went everywhere. There was blood on appliances and on boards. I'm not going to call them 2x4s because they were much larger than that, but these are the type of boards that you use in walls, like before you put sheetrock, that sort of thing. So, what the jury heard in closing arguments from prosecutors Kimberly Gonzalez and Anna Ochoa Nelson was, in addition to, dropping these assault charges that apparently Greg had against Andy, Greg also told him that if he gave him money or the home, that he'd drop those charges. So in her closing argument, prosecutor Kimberly Gonzalez said that, he used his brother's credit card while his brother was missing. He was in possession of his truck. He was driving it around. And then probably the thing that really did it for the jury also was that there were several hours of video shown of Gregorio Barrera talking to detectives, and he changed his story numerous times as to when the last time it was that he saw his brother. He said he saw him on September 12th, then the 11th, and then the 10th. And so, there were a lot of circumstantial things that the prosecutors brought to the jury that Anna Ochoa Nelson, prosecutor, said in her argument was, going to point to even though it was circumstantial, it was going to lead them, if they looked at the totality of the evidence, it was going to lead them to a guilty verdict. And so it was a really interesting trial to watch, and all of the forensics that were involved in it. For instance, they had an FBI forensics expert testify that the inside of a pair of sandy tennis shoes that were found inside the home on sagebrush matched the DNA of the defendant, Gregorio Barrera. Now, they were able to take granular material from a shovel that was also found in that home, and they were able to establish that it was beach sand. But the only thing is that they really wouldn't be able to establish the exact location of where the sand was, just the region in itself. So, this was something that Kimberly Gonzalez and Ana Ochoa Nelson, brought up in their closing arguments. Now, in his closing argument, Gregorio Barrera's attorney, Cornelius Cox, told the jury that the state's about 200 exhibits and close to 40 witnesses, despite having all of that, he argued to the jury that he believed that the state still had not proven that Gregorio Barrera killed his brother. He says that, because there were no witnesses, we don't know how the blood got, all over the place at the sagebrush home. And he said the Nueces County medical examiner could not even determine whether the deceased died on the beach or if he was already dead when he was taken there. And the main thing that he kept pressing on to the jury was there was not one witness that could testify where the man died or who killed him. So that was where the argument ended. And then 4.5 hours later, the jury came back with a guilty verdict. And now today, this morning, we will be hearing opening statements in the punishment phase of this murder trial of Gregorio Barrera, who has now been convicted of killing his brother, Andres Barrera. And Gregorio faces up to life in prison now, and the jury is going to hear evidence, and it could all end today, Chance, one way or the other.
So for today, Elizabeth, 2 cases involving 2 local men who have been convicted and await more sentencing likely. One who's facing multiple trials, and then one, Gregorio Barrera, as you just mentioned, who has been convicted and now faces perhaps life in prison for the murder of his very own brother. So that'll do it for today's episode. As always, Elizabeth, thank you for joining me. Have a good rest of the week at the Bexar County Courthouse, and we'll talk again for our next episode of The Docket.
Thanks, Chance. Looking forward to it. Take care.
And as always, a big thanks to San Antonio Express News courts reporter Elizabeth Zavala for joining me for today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Storland.